Hey friends, thanks so much for all the support from patrons and members of the channel. There's new bonus content out right now, but also be sure to check out my newest review of the film Obsession over on Patreon. It's about 2 hours of analysis and yapping with some friends for your enjoyment, so be sure to let us know the next film that we should check out. Thanks so much. I'm a very average, normal-looking girl, I'd say. And even still, I've had a few weird guys become obsessed with me over the years. Nothing to write home about, really, although now that I think about it, maybe there is another story that I'll send in. This story, though, is about someone I'll call Pizza Hobo. His real name was Jacob, and I don't really care about doxing him because A, he was a pest, and B, he's almost certainly dead by now. And the thing with Pizza Hobo is that I loved him at first. I worked at a small mom-and-pop pizza restaurant. You know, one of those hidden gem places with an insanely loyal customer base. One such loyal customer was Pizza Hobo. Every Tuesday, he'd come in for the Tuesday special, a stuffed crust margarita at half price. Now, he always got a medium with jalapenos as an extra topping, and I remember his order very well because it never changed. He was genuinely an interesting guy. He'd seen action in Vietnam, he'd studied anthropological folklore and marine biology. Strange combinations, he admitted himself. Just courses he'd taken on the internet without any qualifications at the end. Just things that interest me, he'd say. I joked that he should look into how to cook pizza, given how regular he was, and then I quickly added not to do that because we didn't want to lose a valued customer. And this seemed to really cheer him up, and he left me a particularly generous tip that day. Now, I should add that we call him Pizza Hobo. He wasn't actually a hobo. It was a sort of style thing. From the clips of cash I'd seen in his wallet, the guy was packing. He certainly wasn't homeless, but he dressed like a homeless person, and I kind of wondered if he was one of those millionaires who got so rich that they just dressed like they couldn't even give two hoots. And I think I'd probably be one of those guys too. I never missed a shift in the 4 years that I worked at this pizza place. But one week I had some issues that, well, let's just say that it really wouldn't have been great to come into work. In fact, I didn't make it in until my Monday shift the following week. Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, they were always mine. Now, one of my colleagues, an Asian kid called Andrew, who I kind of had a situationship going on with, took me to one side. Now, he was laughing, but in a way that made me think that he wasn't actually amused, but just thought that I might be. He told me that Pizza Hobo had gotten absolutely furious last Tuesday when he found out I wasn't on shift. He demanded to know why and if I'd switched shifts, and, most weirdly, if it was because of him. Andrew had to make a genuine effort to calm him down and explain that I was off sick. Now, he had to explain it so much, in fact, that he was forced to give details to Pizza Hobo that made me a little uncomfortable. I didn't really want this customer knowing intimate details about my food poisoning-based bowel movements, as I'm sure you can understand. Now, the next day, this Pizza Hobo came in as normal, and as soon as he saw me, it was like he'd seen an angel. Andrew was on shift too, and Pizza Hobo apologized profusely for his behavior. He explained that a few years ago, there had been an incident where a service worker he considered a friend had secretly been uncomfortable with his friendliness and had left the job entirely to avoid him. Now, he seemed so sad about that, but it was a little weird, right? Either the girl in question was kind of nuts or there was more to the story. You really don't leave your entire job because a customer being friendly makes you uncomfortable, especially not any time in the last 10 years. Now, things continue as normal with this guy for a while, but I spoke to the manager and Andrew and made sure that Andrew could always be on the Tuesday shift with me too, just in case there was something I wanted him to witness. The manager assured us that the Pizza Hobo was almost certainly harmless, but there was no reason not to be careful. A few months later, my grandma got sick. Nothing serious, it was gallstones, but she was in surgery during my shift, and the manager let me make an exception and keep my cell phone on me, usually a big no-no, so I could just keep an eye out for a call. Now, just after Pizza Hobo had been and gone, I got the call. Before I was even out the restaurant door, I could hear the crackly, broken-up voice of Dad saying that Grandma was fine. The restaurant itself was a bit of a blind spot, so I had to step outside to hear him actually. And that's when I noticed that Pizza Hobo had his back to me in the alleyway a few stores down from ours, and he was dumping the entire pizza that he just bought into the dumpster. Now, it wasn't the case that he'd somehow scarfed it down. As he tossed it in there, the box came open and I saw the pizza spill out. Now, I told Dad that I'd speak to him later, not wanting Pizza Hobo to know that I'd seen him, and then went inside and told Andrew what had gone on. Now, my idea was that maybe that guy had just decided that he wasn't hungry that day, although throwing the entire pizza in the trash was a little extreme. Andrew was a little more suspicious. He decided to wait an hour every Tuesday after Pizza Hobo had left and check the dumpster, as it belonged to a Turkish restaurant, I believe. Now, every single week he'd been tossing the pizza away. Now, this could really mean only one thing. This guy was visiting the store to talk to me, and I tried to convince myself that it was harmless, but Andrew was certain that there was clearly more to it. He decided to tell the manager everything, who agreed that this was definitely a very weird situation, but at the end of the day, we were getting the guy's money, and unless he did anything strange to me, it was up to him what he did with his pizza. Now, that evening, the area manager, Chris, happened to be visiting the store. He asked if we had any security footage of this guy, which, of course, we had plenty. We showed the area manager this guy, and his face went completely white. He recognized him. A fair bit older and more disheveled, of course, but he had a story to tell us that sounded eerily familiar. After 2 years, 2 whole years, Pizza Hobo began to act creepy with an employee that he'd been friendly with for a long time. The area manager was the local store manager at the time and remembered it vividly. This guy spent over 2 years gaining this woman's trust, and then one day he started following her home. Now, the worst part was, back then, this didn't legally count as stalking. Now, he defended himself by saying his own house was on the same route, which it was, and the fact that he spent an hour smoking Camels outside the employee's house, well, that was just because it was the most well-lit area on the route, quote-unquote, and there was nothing the cops could or really would do. And to the point that it was almost seemingly that they were protecting Pizza Hobo, maybe because he was a veteran or something, who knows. The employee, whose name was Molly, was refused a restraining order, and eventually she just left her job, broke her lease, and moved somewhere that this Pizza Hobo couldn't find her. Now, we did the quackalations. It was coming up on 2 years since Pizza Hobo had befriended me, and the hair stood up on the back of my neck. I just knew that I was going to be the next Molly. But what should I do? It didn't sound like there was any legal recourse, willingly or not. Well, thankfully, the area manager had an offer I really couldn't refuse. The pizza restaurant was opening a 3rd joint in the next town over. Now, how would I like to be junior shift manager over there? And of course, I took it. I had a bunch of savings put back, and I was living with my parents, so I could afford to move to a new city. And Jesus Christ, I'm so glad I did, because Andrew called me a few weeks later and asked how squeamish I was. Well, not at all, I said, and he said good, because check the photo he was dropping in the group chat. "I'll find her one day," had been written on the exterior wall of the restaurant in what appeared to be human feces. It was vile. But it's been 8 years. That Pizza Hobo hasn't found me, and even though it really wouldn't take a genius to scope out the 3rd restaurant in the chain, my guess is something happened to him. I tried to Google that Molly girl, and all I could find was an obituary from 6 years ago, which could have been her, and every year there's a message posted on her memorial page saying, "I still miss you." But this year, the message simply said, "I couldn't let it happen again." And I think there's a lot more to this story and Molly, and maybe Chris, the area manager, than perhaps we'll ever really know. And given how much I think Pizza Hobo deserved what he got, I'm just glad that I'm gone, and I think that's for the best. Now, I'm sure you've been in high school, Joel, being the virile young man you grew into, but Jesus Christ, young love is more like torture, especially when you're all naive teens and people won't believe that sometimes girls genuinely are completely oblivious to the hidden, mysterious feeling that their male friends have for them. It all began with someone named Brian. Brian was my friend from the year we started high school, and within just a few weeks, I realized that I had a pretty big crush on him. You know, the kind of teenage nonsense. Writing his name in your notebook, getting him to take photo booth pictures with you, doing all sorts of just goofy stuff. Now, I really thought that the more we hung out, the more I made it clear to him that I wasn't hanging out with anyone else, and he'd get the hint. But he didn't, so there was only one conclusion I could draw. He didn't like me in that way. And so after a few months of just moping, I moved on and eventually found another boyfriend. His name is Paul. Now, I liked Paul, I really did, but I didn't feel the same about him as I did with Brian. And Paul was very possessive. I didn't really get to hang out with my female friends that much, let alone Brian, so I guess from Brian's perspective, I just ditched him. And then I started getting the note. Well, essay, really, and it was like 15 freaking pages in my lockers. They were anonymous, but Brian had made no attempt to disguise his handwriting, and they shocked me to my core. They were all about how I'd friend-zoned him, that I'd been happy to drag him along as a friend, but any time he made a move, he never once had made a move, I'd just brush him off. Now bear in mind that this was a guy that I would have given my heart and soul to. Up until that essay, I probably still would have ditched Paul if Brian had asked. But now he was saying all sorts of awful things to me, that I'd let him on, that I surely knew that I owed him something and that I was a trashy human being. And then, here was the real kicker. There was an entire page about how he could forgive me and make sure that the rest of my school days were safe and normal if I agreed to orally pleasure him so he could get me out of his system. Now, immediately, whatever I believed about Brian was just out the window. Paul wasn't perfect, but this guy contained an inner predator, and I was honestly genuinely scared. Now, the worst part is, I couldn't talk to Paul about it because I knew that he'd make that situation worse. And also, Paul had succeeded in isolating me from the majority of my female friends too, so I was really alone. All I could do was confront Brian myself, and I did this by posting a letter containing 2 single words through the slit in his locker, and it said, "Hell no." It took a few days to get his response, but it was as petty as it was chilling. He threatened that if I refused his kind offer, he would make sure that it got spread around the school that I was having an affair with our young, attractive English teacher. Even though there was no truth to that, I knew how that could ruin a teacher's life and also a student's. All I could think to do was take everything to the guidance counselor. She read it all and placed it on her desk. I expected her to look more concerned about the whole ordeal, and instead, she confided something in me that I hadn't shared until now. That same day, another student had discovered a manifesto on Brian's desk detailing how the entire grade would suffer, and that their suffering would be on my conscience, and their souls would haunt me forever. So while I was in the meeting with the guidance counselor, my once crush, once bestie, now obsessive stalker was being marched away from the school in handcuffs in front of all the other students. Needless to say, back in the 2020s, a student who had implicated themselves in a plot to commit something like that was not treated lightly, and as far as I know, Brian is still in some kind of judicial system due to increasingly violent behavior. As for Paul, I can thankfully say that I kicked him to the curb, and going forward, I'm going to try developing better taste in men who don't either isolate me from friends or invent a friend zone that I would have quite happily dragged them out of, kicking and screaming, into my loving arms. Did you know that girls can rot max too? They can be as gross, if not grosser, than dudes, and there's something about a stinky girl that takes things to the next level. And one of those girls developed a major crush on me as soon as I started college. Now, her hygiene was abysmal. Her face was covered in acne sores, and she washed her hair so infrequently that you could regularly smell it. She was one of the first late 2000s internet kids who thought being a total C-word was the coolest thing you can possibly be. The more unpleasant this girl could be, let's call her Izzy for the sake of the story, then the worse she'd get. I remember one time she'd bragged to a bunch of us about how in elementary school she'd persuaded a Down syndrome girl to smash her face against the wall because it would fix her. Even worse, some of her weird incel acolytes laughed along with her. I'm pretty sure I would have gotten a regular tongue whipping from Izzy if she didn't, and I hate to say this, want to jump my bones. The idea even now makes me feel sick. There were so many stories that she shared, and from how she'd hurt and alienated people from elementary school to the end of high school. She cost a teacher his job by stripping off her top just as she knew another staff member was about to enter, and they did not side with the teacher. When they were kids, she persuaded her sister to let her hit her between the legs so hard that her sister could no longer have children. Izzy found this hilarious. In high school, she and some of her weirdo friends waited until the shy Christian girl had gotten out of the shower and then grabbed her and shoved her fully naked into the boys' locker room. Just terrible, disgusting individual behavior. And did I mention that she stank? She one day came to me and told me, as if I'd be sad about this, that one of her roommates, Ari, had a crush on her. She wanted to cook up revenge on Ari so he knew never to lust after her again. I forget her plan exactly, but it involved leaking a dick pic all across campus. Now, I was having none of it, and I told her so. She stormed off, and I didn't hear from her again until late that night. And then I heard her banging on my door. Well, not exactly banging, but stabbing. She was stabbing at my door with a knife, crying, saying we were destined to be together, and how could I do this to her? That we'd always been together. I pointed out that we'd never even dated and I had zero interest in doing so. And the next day I reported everything to campus security and various other authorities, and I was told that actually I didn't need to worry about it. Izzy was already being expelled at the end of the semester in just a week for not having attended a single lecture in the 2 semesters of junior year. Impressive. If I had any advice for the younger people looking to get into the dating game, it would be this. Do not trust anyone who claims they love you and are obsessed with you. If they've known you for 1 week and they're declaring you're the one, then they probably have an ulterior motive. I know this makes me sound cynical, but about a decade ago, I had a horrific experience with a very horrific person in every way, and for the most part, I only have myself to blame. I'm a minor public figure in a few fields, so I won't go into details about this woman or how we met. It was an industry that I worked in before the one I work in now. This woman contacted me out of the blue to tell me that I was her favorite non-fiction writer in a certain field, and that something I'd made after that career was her favorite thing of all time. Now, don't get me wrong, I was proud of this thing I'd made, and I appreciate anyone who enjoys it. But immediately, to claim it was her favorite thing ever made, alarm bells were ringing. It wasn't even 99% as good as most other things, and again, I say that I am proud of this piece or work I'd released, but already I was fairly certain that I was being love-bombed and this woman wanted something from me. Unfortunately, due to a mixture of naivety and idiocy and really neurodivergence, I wasn't willing to actually say so. What followed next was a day or two of Snapchat flirting, followed by some of the most unflattering, unsolicited nudes you ever did see. I pretended that I was impressed because I don't want to crap on anyone's self-esteem, but I've seen more flattering autopsy photos. And the next day, and if this seems quick, it's because it was, she asked if she could come down to visit me because there was clearly chemistry between us, and she had a feeling that maybe we were designed to be together. That I was her dream guy and I was some kind of super genius. LOL. Now I said no, I'd just come out of a relationship, a really bad one, and I really didn't want anything more than casual fun for now. And that's when the first temper tantrum happened. Suddenly, I'd be making her feel like a lady of ill repute if I'd seen nudes of her without then allowing her to come and visit and at least see how things worked out. And I was so taken aback by this logic. Like, literally, how am I supposed to just give everything to you because you just showed yourself to me unsolicited? I still said no, but she spent days and days and days sending me voice messages, crying about how I'd made her feel like some words I shouldn't say on here, all because she'd sent these unsolicited nudes. And so eventually I just said yes, come visit for 4 days and we can see how things went. I knew how they'd go. I'd had no interest in being in a relationship, and I wasn't attracted to her. Maybe in person I could just let her down gently. And when I met her at that station, it was even more obvious that I was deeply, deeply unattracted to who she was. And not only that, but within 10 minutes of getting to my house, she wanted to engage in physical activity, if you know what I mean, and I tried everything to put her off, and eventually she kind of pushed herself onto me and started doing things that I was in no mood for and had no attraction to do. And the next day I told her that, as she promised, we'd give it a try, but I really wasn't feeling any chemistry between us, and I didn't think a relationship was a good idea. Cue tantrum number 2. This time I lured her down here with the intent of intimate activity, which I had texts to disprove even, and that the only way she could possibly be comfortable with herself is if we started dating. But not just that. To prove my devotion to her, I had to allow her to move in. Now I should add that I was staying with my parents at the time. That night, without even consulting me that this would happen, she told my parents that I'd invited her to move in for a while. And then she kept encouraging me to tell them that she was the one. I don't know why I went along with it, other than in my defense I'd suffered some very severe psychological and physical issues over the last 10 years, which she had known about in advance and, in retrospect, had quite clearly manipulated these things. It became clearer what her end goal was when she started suggesting things like having my dad provide her with a weekly allowance so she could come off of disability benefits, which to this day, I still have no idea what those benefits really were for. Now obviously my dad said no, but my parents were also ridiculously kind, and they converted one of the larger rooms into a double bedroom for us. Now one event that sticks out in my mind is when we went to buy a bed. There were 2 possible sizes, one that was perfectly large and one that was ridiculously huge. I said that we should go for the large one. Now she demanded that we have the largest and most expensive bed possible, which, I note, my parents were kindly paying for. Now from the start, if I didn't want to engage in certain activities with her, she'd throw a tantrum, saying I was making her feel undesirable and that I had to let her do things to me that I really, really didn't want to, and she'd feel unwanted. On the other hand, whenever she did browbeat me into agreeing, she'd quickly descend into the tactic of negging, intentionally playing on my own insecurities of making me feel even worse about the interactions between us. And I took to avoiding her as much as I could. I pretended to keep falling asleep on the couch so I didn't have to share a bed with her, and things just got worse from there. She wasn't contributing a single thing to the family financially. Myself and my parents were paying for everything. But here's possibly the worst thing, and may explain a little more as to why I allowed this to continue happening for 6 months. After the first few days of her being present at my house, she revealed that she had a 4-year-old boy who she was no longer allowed custody of. And when I expressed the fact that I wasn't particularly happy with having this fact hidden from me, and wasn't emotionally prepared to be in a relationship with someone who had a child, under extremely complicated circumstances no less, she said something that chilled me to the bone. She said that if her son ruined her chances at happiness again, she had no idea what she might do to him, that any subsequent actions would be my doing. She would use this for the duration of the relationship, that if we weren't together and if she didn't get what she wanted, then her son could be at risk. Eventually, I traveled to another part of the country and met her son, who was living with his father and stepmother, and it was pretty clear that she wasn't allowed unsupervised visits with her son, and so her threats had been somewhat empty. This was the same trip where she invited her disgusting mom with orange hair to come stay with us for Christmas. I was taken aback and said that perhaps this was something we should discuss with my parents first. Her response? They'd be fine with it, and needless to say, they were not. Things came to a head a month later. It turned out that she'd been using my mom's expensive shampoo and cosmetics without even asking, and that was the final straw. We told her that having a fourth person living in the house, contributing nothing to groceries, rent, household items, etc., while spending literally thousands of dollars on herself, wasn't really feasible. And the next day, she decided that she should go back and stay with her mom for a while. Fine by me, even if it meant that I had to pay back my mom for the $300 that my ex had borrowed from her. There was one final desperate attempt to use her obsession with financially conning my family. She emailed me from her hometown saying that things could go back to normal if she was less stressed because her mom was struggling to pay her mortgage, and if we could pay $500 a month to help her out, she could go back to being the one and we could maybe get married. I should add here that I knew for a fact that her mother did not have a mortgage, and when I said no, that wasn't doable, she sent me one more text saying that she couldn't handle the drama of the relationship, and I never heard from her again. This is someone who acted so obsessed with me that it scared me. This is someone who used the threat of harming her own 4-year-old child as a way of keeping me and my family financing her lifestyle while she happily bought designer clothes and MacBooks. And to this day, I don't think she was obsessed with me, but was someone who she thought she could scam with her feminine wiles and her charm. Unfortunately for her, she had neither, and all she had was a heart full of hate, an obsession with laziness, and a complete inability to tell the truth. Now, I'm sure there are scarier stories of obsession knowing that a lot of her claims were BS, but at the time, the idea that she could harm her kid if I didn't continue to fund her lifestyle was one of the creepiest, most hateful, laziest, most obsessive behaviors I've ever encountered. And so yeah, my tip to you younger people, don't fall for someone who treats you like the second coming, and more often than not, they're fixated on an imagined version of you, one who will give them everything they want and get nothing in return. And that is a true psychopath. I won't name the office or its functionality, but I've been working there for around 4 months when I started to notice undue attention from the boss. It's hard to explain. It was just like he looked at me more than he did the others. And then, the emails started. They were anonymous, but sent from the company internal network, something that only a few people are able to do. They described me as angelic, perfect, my body divine, etc. Now, for one, this is absolutely not true, and secondly, obviously not appropriate. Every time I checked my emails, I felt a spike of panic as a new anonymous love note appeared. It ramped up even further when my car was in the shop and I was forced to walk the 3 blocks from the office to my apartment. I could hear someone following me. I know I could. Heavy-set, shallow breathing, just like the boss, but whenever I turned, I never caught a stalker. Now, I scurried forward a bit and ducked into an alley, certain that nobody had seen me. A figure burst into that alley, and they were heavy-set and heavy-breathing all right, but it wasn't the boss. It was his direct assistant, Jan. Now, what the hell, I thought to myself. I asked Jan if she was okay and if she needed help with anything, and she went full-on Karen on steroids. I was absolutely blasted with shrieks and accusations and yells about how I knew what I'd done. Then she grabbed me, uncomfortably by the breasts of all places, and dragged me into the alley. She said that it was such a tease at work, so maybe she'll leave me stripped and exposed for everyone to find and have their way with me. I was screaming, crying, shaking, and calling for help. I barely even noticed Jan, and I certainly was not a tease at work. I have a husband, for one thing. Jan began to tear at my clothes, trying to expose me, and I managed a vicious rake of my nails down her face. And then I heard it. The blissful sound of a police siren and a flashlight. It didn't take the officers long to work out what was going on, and once I explained my story, as little sense as it even made to me in the moment, Jan was soon in handcuffs. The next day at work was full of gossip. It appears that Jan had been the one who thought that I was teasing her, and on her work PC they found numerous fanfics about me and her, all in an inappropriate nature, and it was as if she couldn't discern these fictions from reality. The boss told me that he'd been keeping an eye on Jan to see how she behaved towards me because he suspected her of driving out another female hire but couldn't be completely sure. It was a relief to know that he wasn't constantly staring at me anyway. I guess sometimes the obsessive and the perverts are the least likely suspects. When Grandma died in the 80s, I don't think my grandpa expected to find love again, let alone 20 years later. And yet as we drove him to the nursing home, this was his choice by the way, we joked about how he might meet a hot octogenarian who could be his life partner for the rest of it. Now Grandpa poo-pooed this idea, but I could tell that he kind of liked it too. Of course, not that I was a real expert, but at 23 I didn't really imagine that real old people's parts worked anymore, and so I pictured older love as something beautiful. Jigsaw puzzles with a morning cup of coffee, walks by the lake, watching the sun go down from a beach. And you know what? That's exactly what Grandpa found with Edith Beaton. I saw her giving him the eye on the day he moved in. After we'd unpacked Grandpa's meager belongings, I was in the rec room making Grandpa and Dad a drink. Edith sidled up to me, introduced herself, and told me that my grandpa was a bit of a dish, wasn't he? I laughed, blushing a little, because what do you say to that about your own family member? Instead, I changed the subject to try selling him to her as a friend and companion. He was smart, funny, well-read, and hadn't come to the nursing home to just give up on life. Now, these all seemed to be the right things to say to Edith. Her eyes lit up at the idea of Grandpa wanting a new lease on life, and she told me that what she'd been looking for, too. I promised that I'd introduce them over dinner, and I did. Now, it was soon clear that they would become fast friends. The residents were encouraged to communicate with their family via letter or email rather than telephone, to keep their minds sharp, so for the first few weeks we received gushing, almost teenage messages from Grandpa about his time with Edith. They had soon become the nursing home's trivia night champions, and they'd lost entire days to walks around the lakes and the grounds, and they even shared a kiss or two as the sun went down. Then, Grandpa's emails changed. They became, well, creepy, to put it in the best way that I can. Instead of the paragraphs of gushing text that he'd send us, we'd started receiving emails of one sentence that said things like, "There's something wrong with this place. I see a shadow at the door. She scratches in the night." Naturally, we reached out to the nursing home, and Grandpa's mental faculties had always been sharp as a knife, but this screamed dementia. They called us all in for a meeting with him, and we discussed the emails. Grandpa explained that he was having night terrors and was deeply apologetic, but that the only way he seemed to be able to break out of them was to email the people he loved and snap himself back to reality. And it all felt very strange. More emails arrived and became clear that they were written by a very scared, very unsettled person. They spoke of a spirit that roamed the halls, searching for its next victim. Then during the day, he'd be full of apologies. And then he told us that he'd spoken to Edith about the night terrors in the emails and that she suddenly became strangely angry with him. None of this was adding up, and I was starting to become a little scared. And so I booked an appointment with the head of the nursing home by myself without telling my parents or Grandpa, making sure that it fell on a day when he was part of a residential day trip. I didn't get many answers from the head nurse, but the lack of answers told me plenty. Whenever I mentioned Edith, there was sort of a wince or a cringe, and so I started grilling Grandpa. Grandpa wasn't the first man Edith had befriended, and Grandpa wasn't the first man who, upon befriending her, had started sending strange correspondence. In the end, that guy who'd been with Edith, his family, had transferred him from that nursing home, although they were unsure why. And it was just chalked up to some coincidence, but now Edith was involved in both of these events. And so I began to ask about their night staff, and it turned out that they were severely short-staffed at night. and so if something were to happen, it might actually get overlooked. Now, I was starting to get an idea, a narrative really, and it took quite a bit of persuading to let the head nurse allow me to stay overnight in an empty residential room, but it's truly amazing how far dollary dues will go. I wanted to test my theory. Now, sure enough, around midnight, as I crept into the corridor that housed Grandpa's room, there was no staff to be seen. But there was instead a person stood outside of Grandpa's room. This person was running her fingernails slowly down the door, no doubt the scratching that Grandpa had heard. She was dressed in this nightgown, and I could tell immediately that was Edith. I bumped against something and almost let out a yell, expecting Edith to turn and spot me, but instead she reacted differently. She burst the door open to Grandpa's room, which of course wasn't allowed to be locked from the inside. I could hear him screaming within the darkness, and it took me a minute or two to reach the room and slap the light on. Now by this time Edith had stripped her gown off completely, and I was horrified to see that her naked body was now slathered in some type of oil. I'm so tired of waiting, she was screaming at my grandpa, "Take me, take me." I was mortified. What could I do? All I could do was tackle that slimy, naked old lady off of my grandpa before he had a heart attack. Now, it was really a tragic tale, if I'm being honest. Edith had some form of dementia. They called it sundowning, and as night fell, the kind-loving Edith essentially became some crazy 84-year-old witch with Grandpa as her pent-up target. Now, sadly, Edith had to be transferred to a more secure unit where she could receive the treatment she required, and there was far too much danger of developing an obsession with another patient, even if they managed to cure her of this fixation on my grandpa. And so, my poor grandfather lost the best friend he'd had since Grandma, but like he said the next day, there were new residents all the time. Maybe one day there'd be a new Edith who didn't turn into a nymphomaniac witch when the sun went down, and that sounded like an altogether more promising friendship. So I'll start out by saying that I used to be homeless. Now, they were rough years, and I can't say that I'm not to blame. I had a wife and kids, I had a good job, and I threw it all away thanks to a gambling addiction. I soon learned that gambling with your own life and safety is a pretty bad idea, though, and after years of nights spent on the streets in sub-zero temperatures and 3 to 4 days without food and barely any water, I really regretted my life choices. When I found the Eastman soup kitchen, it was like an oasis in a storm of poop. It was one of those secrets where you only found out about it from another homeless person that trusted you, and this meant that almost everyone who you'd meet there was one of the good ones. Occasionally you get a bad egg come in and try and ruin it for everyone, but they were soon sent packing by the community that we built up. And perhaps the linchpin of this entire community was someone named Angela. She was a pretty, really beautiful young woman in her early 30s, and she didn't run the soup kitchen, but she was certainly the face of it. And so you can imagine my surprise when I picked up on the signs that Angela was maybe possibly into me. Now, I won't lie. Even back when I wasn't a bad-looking dude, I never touched substances, just gambling, and I kept myself as healthy and fit as possible living in those streets. I was maybe a few years older than Angela, but, you can just imagine someone like that would be taken. But apparently not so, as she'd always dish me out a little extra portion and tell me to look after my body and remark how fit I was and things like that. The kind of thing where someone who's been with a few women can just kind of pick up on as flirting, I guess. Now, this carried on for a few months. I wanted to be absolutely sure before I made any move, and the last thing I wanted to be was the weird homeless bum who was hitting on the pretty girl just doing her job. It turns out I didn't need to wait. Angela approached me, only it wasn't quite the romantic movie moment that I'd been picturing. I was staying at a homeless shelter at the time, one of the very rare instances where I'd been able to get in, and I get this message, saying that my wife is downstairs and she'd forgiven me, and she's here to bring me home. Now, I knew 100% that this was not my actual wife because we were divorced and she'd remarried, and so I went downstairs with the most burning curiosity, as you can imagine. Now picture my surprise when it was Angela standing there, who then rushed into an embrace, planted a kiss on my lips, and then told me it was time to come home. Now the guy at the front desk quickly looked through my file and remarked that I'd registered as single, and he said that he was just doing his job, but he had to check that everything was kosher here. And I mean, it was pretty odd, but I was hardly going to say no. Angela isn't my wife, and if she wanted to bring me home and play at marriage as our first step, well, let's just say that it had been a while and I wasn't really thinking with my brain. We drove back to Angela's place in silence, and every time I tried to ask her what was up, she'd just make a sort of shush sound and give me this knowing smile. Now, the first thing we were doing, she said, was having a drink, and she had the most amazing blend of tea she wanted me to try. Now, I wasn't arguing with that either. It did smell and taste amazing, and I remember thinking that even as I felt myself drifting under, like the time that I'd taken anesthetic for the injury that crippled my work, I remember thinking what a waste of tea as I fell to the side and spilling that liquid onto the carpet. And the next thing, I woke up in a basement with the most painful pinching on my pectoral muscles I could ever imagine. Now, as a homeless person, you're trained to wake up as quickly as possible, and I forced myself to do so, and that's how I discovered so quickly that my chest was hooked up to some type of clamp or car battery. I was naked, and Angela sat in a chair opposite me, still sipping her drink and still smiling gently. I opened my mouth to speak, to ask Angela what was going on, but before I could even get a word out, she shocks me, sending searing electrical current through my body. I waited, and then I tried again. Another shock, and then another. And then blissfully, Angela said that was enough, that she didn't want to injure my beautiful body. She just wanted to shock me into remembering again. Remembering what? I asked. Another shock. I stayed quiet. She told me I was meant to remember who I am. But I knew who I was, and Jesus Christ, sometimes I wish I didn't. I'd effed up my entire life. I'd ruined my relationship with my wife and kids and my parents, and a part of me wished that Angela could just fry me into being a different person. Now, who am I asked again. Angela's hand hovered over that battery and then stopped. She told me I was Patrick. She was right. That was my name. Patrick McKirk. I told her so. Another shock, and this time longer and stronger. She began to scream at me about this McKirk nonsense, that I shouldn't lie. I was Patrick Carson, husband to Angela Carson. Her husband, killed in a hit-and-run 3 years ago, who 3 years later would look like me, just like me. And somehow, his spirit had possessed me. She told me that if it was a car that killed me, then a car battery could bring me back. I told her it didn't work like that, not at all. Electricity as reincarnation is the subject of science fiction. And the shock was so strong this time and went on for so long that I screamed and soiled myself. Angela chastised me, then headed upstairs to acquire some cleaning materials. Now, I waited no time in trying to take my chance. I used all my strength not to snap the rope that I was tied with, but to break apart the wooden chair that she'd mistakenly used on which to seat me. And it worked like a charm. The first thing I did was unclip the electrodes from my chest, and then I grabbed the hefty car battery. I needed something as a weapon, and I hid under the basement stairs and waited for Angela to descend. I felt terrible, absolutely terrible for doing this, but trying to hold back my swing, I hit her square in the side of the head with that car battery. Angela crumpled to the ground, and I was out of that house and running down the street, blood streaming from my chest, asking for help. Eventually, I was stopped by a cop car and taken to the station, and I told them everything. The cops looked into Angela, and everything I said rang true, and the next step was to go and pay her a visit. Unfortunately, this is where things take a sudden and terrifying turn. Angela was gone. Hastily packaged luggage had been thrown together, and that had disappeared too. This was 8 years ago now, and I've never heard from her since, not directly anyway, but sometimes I get a spam email or catch a sight of a hoodie-wearing figure ducking down an alley. But I have to wonder, Has Angela broken free of her delusions, or has she moved on? Or is she still obsessed with the idea that I am somehow possessed by the spirit of her dead husband? Do I even really want to know? Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday and Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, and there are super fun live streams on Sundays and Wednesday nights. If you got a story, be sure to submit them over at my email, LetsReadSubmissions@gmail.com, and you might even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks for members of the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories in big compilations, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. And I also have a true crime channel called Saturn Soul. All links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, Evil Larry is here to strip your penar.